Kapwa. The San Buenaventura said that in the early Tagalog Spanish dictionaries, kapwa, firmly written as kapiwa, was defined as igual or equal, ambos or both, and intlambos also means both. And according to Dinuseda and the Sanlosar, ambos a dos igualmente, both or two equally. These general definitions, one could technically speak of two non-human objects as kapwa, especially since there is ambos a dos igualmente given for another phrase kapwa ko tao, which is defined igual a me o otoyo, or the same as me or another me. The concept of kapwa. The basis of interactions among people is clearly an important aspect of social life. Interactions in without doubt, an analysis of social of the Philippine environment as codified in the language reveals a lot about our world view and character. For this reason, social interaction should be the meaningful focus of analysis in the process of identifying the concept of kapwa. The Filipino language, on this score, provides conceptual distinctions among several levels and modes of social interaction. Santiago and Enriquez identified the 8 levels. Number 1, pakikitungo, or transaction and civility with. For example, the way I treat my grandmother is different from the way I treat my youngest brothers because pakikitungo is one of the Filipino culture in how you treat each member of the society according to their position. Number 2, pakikisalamuha or interaction with. Like for example, recently I experienced pakikisalamuha meeting my new classmates. And number 3, pakikilahok or joining and participating with. An example is that I experienced pakikilahok during our poetry contest last school year. And number 4, pakikibagay or in conformity with and in accord with. For instance, I experienced pakikibagay when I go to church, I dress formally, opposite from when I hang out with my friends. Number 5, pakikisama or being along with. I experience pakikisama when I discuss schoolwork, especially group meetings with my classmates. And number 6, pakikipagpalagayang loob or being in rapport and understanding or acceptance of. In this case, the level of trust and intimacy I give is different when I am with my best friend compared with I am with my friend. And number 7, pakikisangkot or getting involved. I experience pakikisangkot right now in this reporting. And lastly, number 8, pakikiisa or being one with. I experience pakikiisa recently in our group activities. The different levels of interpersonal relations are not just conceptually but also behaviorally different. As an example, Santiago looks at the language of food, which is really the language of interpersonal relationship in food sharing among the Filipino Bulacan middle class. She discusses 5 behaviorally recognizable level under 2 general categories which are ibang tao or outsider category and hindi ibang tao or one of us category level. First, pakikitungo, level of amenities. Second, pakikibagay, level of conforming. Third, pakikipagpalagayang loob, level of mutual trust. Fourth, pakikisa, level of vision, oneness, and full trust. And fifth, pakikisama, level of adjusting. The foregoing is evidence for the claim that the domain of interpersonal relations is theoretically fertile and lexically elaborate in Filipino. Moreover, anyone looking for a core concept that would help explain Filipino interpersonal behavior cannot help but be struck by the superordinate concept of kapwa. It is the only concept which embraces both of the categories of outsider, ibang tao, and one of us, hindi ibang tao. Similarly, pagkapwa categories embraces all of the levels in both.
Filipino English dictionaries generally give the words both and fellow being as translations of kapwa. However, when asked for the closet English equivalent of kapwa, one word that generally comes to mind is the English word others. In meaning, the Filipino word kapwa is very different from this. Kapwa is the unity of the self and others. In English, the word others is actually used in oppositions to the self and implies the recognition of the self as a separate identity. In contrast, kapwa is a recognition of shared identity. A person starts having a kapwa not so much because of a recognition of status given him by others but more so because of his awareness of shared identity. The ako and the iba sa akin, others, are one and the same in kapwa psychology. Hindi ako iba sa aking kapwa. I am no different from others. Once ako starts thinking of himself as different from kapwa, the self, in effect, denies the status of kapwa to the other. Breslin notes that all cultures distinguish between the in-group and the out-group, the member and the non-member, the inside and the outsider. He summarizes that this might be an example of an ethical or universal distinctions to be at least one culture that does not yet. There seems fit this would perfectly that of the middle class Filipino from the Philippine province of Bulacan. For the Bulacino, the ibang tao or outsider is kapwa in the same manner that the hindi ibang tao, one of us, is also kapwa. The unity of the one of us and the other, presumably because of the importance of kapwa. The Filipino language has two pronouns for the English. We and exclusive. We, kami, and exclusive. We, tayo. So,
the significant influences, similarities of Asian and Western culture. Some parts of Eastern and Western civilizations are strikingly similar. The first parallel is that both adhere to religious ideas. Both cultures have religious beliefs that impact their lives. Christians in the West, for example, go to church every Sunday to pray. Similarly, Muslims in the East go to the mosque every Friday to practice their religions. Furthermore, families in both East and West raise their children according to their religious beliefs, allowing them to pass these values in the future generation. Another thing that two civilizations have in common in how they communicate. When they speak in every conversation, people employ similar phrases. People in both sides use comparable language to convey the expression they want to explain to one another. Furthermore, in terms of commercial life, both are identical. For example, they've been working in banking system for commercial use. That is why, in all culture applications like checks, credits, and guarantees give commercial life a strong direction. When comparing Eastern and Western culture, Western countries are more literal than Eastern countries, according to migrationtranslator.com. It is the most significant differences. People in Western culture are more open and critical. They discuss topics that are taboo in Eastern cultures, and they're free to express their feelings and release their wrath if they believe it is necessary. This type of behavior is unbird of Eastern civilization. People prefer to deal with tough situations with excellent manners rather than aggression. Another difference of Western and Eastern culture. The West people are more free and flexible to make their own decisions, whereas the East family make more decisions jointly. Finally, arranged marriages are now common in Western countries, as may they believe that love is the best method to tie the knot.
The significant influences of Asia and Western culture. Apart from the unifying influence of Confucianism, Taoism, Chinese characters, and numerous other Chinese cultural influences, East Asian national costumes, architecture, literature, cuisines, traditional music, performing arts, and crafts also have been developed from many independent and local concepts. They have grown and diversified as many rank among the most refined expression of artistic, and physical ideas in the world. This part is self-explanatory that East Asian especially is most influential around the Asian continent than other Asian countries. Like for example, in the Philippines, about our food like lumpia, pancit, siopaw. I came from the China or the Chinese culture. Examples. Notable among others are Japanese gardens and landscape planning, Heian literature, Vietnamese water poetry, and the artifacts of the Dongsun culture. Modern research has also focused on the several nations' pivotal role on the collective body of East Asian Buddhism and the culture and the Korean influence on the Japanese culture as well as the Japanese influence on Korean culture. As the text said, we are all influencing each other, though some are from really specific country of origin, but we also have our own versions and diversifying them because of those influences. Because I believe that all Asian countries have really distinct and unique trait among each other. Westernization is a process of cultures and countries in other areas of the world adopting the practices and culture of Western Europe whether by force of influence. As part of the colonial process, Westernization spread throughout most of the world, and it continues to be an important cultural phenomenon as a result of globalization. Westernization began with traders, conquerors, and missionaries from Western Europe who believed their way of life was superior to that of people they visited. Western Europe business techniques, languages, alphabet, and dress were required or encouraged for the occupied peoples. The idea of Westernization, though some others see it as a negative thing because how they introduce and force their own culture to the people that they colonized, but in my opinion, we cannot ignore how also influential and how their culture also integrate ours. One biggest example that I give you is how the Spaniards colonized the Philippines. Though people nowadays have varying opinion whether or not it was good, bad, or they were staying neutral. But in my opinion that from the past, it will bound to happen, and nothing and the thing we do is should accept and acknowledge and also celebrate that today there are no more people from other country try to colonize us today. They were also urged to adopt Western European educational, intellectual, and aesthetic standards as well as convert to Christianity. Many countries were forced to adopt Western-style government and military practices. In the 21st century, the United States, itself the result of Western European colonization of North America, arguably became the most significant exporter of Western culture. Its movies, popular music, and popular fashion were taken up not only in Asia, Africa, and Central and South America, but even in Western Europe itself. Technology acted as both form of the transmitter of Westernization. The biggest influences that the Western culture give us is that their education system, the concept of globalization, and the technology, and how it is effective and significant today, and how it became our own standard of living in the 21st century. This part alone is very self-explanatory. It showed us how really influential and therefore powerful the Westernization and their culture to us. But though some others may think it's us violating them because how their way of forcing their influences to us, but we cannot also deny that it also helped us how we see the world, and especially especially their introduction of globalization, their technology, and also their knowledge they shared with us. And as the text said, even though Western Europe itself is also influencing each other, therefore no culture is gatekeeping other culture because they are not or not.
Pillars of Filipino virtue ethics, Loob and Kapwa, with the help of Akima's metaphysical doctrine of potency of act and the psychology, these concepts were articulated. The metaphysical doctrine and the psychology of powers of the soul were borrowed from Akimas to interpret Loob as a holistic and relational will. It is holistic in the sense that other human powers, reason, and the sensitive appetite are not differentiated, but still contained in it, and relational in the sense that it is in constant relation with the Kapwa. This Thomistic interpretation of Loob serves as a useful corrective to modern anachronistic interpretations of Loob in terms of interiority or subjectivity. This is also showed how Filipino ethical concepts can be understood as habits of the Loob. This allows us to talk about them as a virtue ethics. Many Filipino ethical concepts are socially and culturally instilled as second nature. Kapwa is the second-person perspective of this Loob. Each human being is potentially a Kapwa, and yet this Kapwa relationship must be actual and strengthened through Filipino virtue. According to Thomist metaphysics, this time in the form of the innovation of Norris Clark was used to provide a metaphysics for Kapwa in terms of person in relation. This is also serves as protection from modern misinterpretations. The goal or telos of Filipino virtue ethics is the greatest unity or pagkakaisa between the Loob and Kapwa. This is the unity of wills both in seeking what is good for the other in the commitment to the preservation and strengthening of the relationship. Pagkakaisa is what constitutes happiness within the perspective of Filipino virtue ethics. I can also say that this is not just bring happiness, but can also bring peace within every Filipinos. It might be within our family, friends, and in the community. Loob is indigenously Filipino, philosophically and culturally speaking. Though Loob was an influence of the Spaniards during their reign in the Philippines, in church, the core of Loob can be traced to the Filipinos' journey toward oneness with God. Loob depends and broadens the meaning of God in the lives of the people, according to Alejo. The basis of Christian value of sensitivity to the needs of others and gratitude is traced in Loob, or goodness is embodied in Loob. Loob does not stress individuality per se. Rather, Loob is connected with the Filipino's transpersonal view of the world, that is, the self is governed by personal being and that good should be for the advancement of many. Loob is an oasis amidst life struggles, where peace and love springs. Alejo's concepts of Loob surmise Loob as a reality which promotes harmony and creativity. Loob is similar with other Oriental views like the concept of Atman in Buddhism and Chinese Jin. Loob aspires for harmony or sakwa with others, God, and nature. Loob prioritizes family, relatives, and even non-kinsmen. In fact, Loob bridges individual differences and is the common factor among human beings.